Looks like we have a quorum. So we will move on to, we have the minutes. Does anybody want to move the minutes from the October meeting?
Motion to approve.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we have minutes. Bills, John, you want to talk about the bills? Or
Sure,
Eric?
sure. We've got a number of grants that were issued under a facade improvement program, so we'll be talking about those a little bit later on. We have had some bills pertaining to the UBC property, the stencil project, in which we did have some review fees for MPC, a review of the Phase 1 and Phase 2. These are items that we would have paid for earlier on in the process prior to sale, but we're still on the hook for that. So we have that in there. Some work that we're doing on the 213 Ramsey Street building, just some gutters and other exterior things at this point. And I could stand for any specific questions that you might have.
Do you have any questions for John? Okay, with that, I'll look for a motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes. Looks like our next order of business is the 2002 Facade Improvement Grant Program Summary, and that might be you, Eric?
You got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. So a summary this evening on the 2022 Facade Improvement Grant Program. This was a pilot project really put forward by HEDRA as a means to help both the Vermilion Street corridor as well as downtown with upgrades to the facade. You allocated $50,000 towards that program. We did approve $50,000 worth of projects. To date, we've distributed just over $44,000 in those grant dollars. 11 projects, 10 were completed. We'll get to more, that one that wasn't a little bit later. But overall, we leveraged over $75,000 of private investment. The 2022, the pilot program required a 1-to-1 match up to $5,000. So really that benchmark would have been that $44,189 would have been that just 1-to-1, but we achieved, again, that $75,000, so $1.71. So that was excellent to see. I'm going to go through each of them that were completed. So here's the first one at 103 2nd Street East, formerly the Town Cobbler. Katie Lindbergh Insurance took over that building, purchased it, replaced the awning as well as the metal awning frame itself. Project cost just over $5,000. Grant award of just half of that. The Meyer Company building at 117 2nd Street. This one had both glazing of windows that had failed as well as some roofing issues that was causing some water issues in turn. So they were able to fix both those things. That came in at $4,600 roughly for a grant of about $2,300. You see some before and after photos there. At 118 2nd Street, the Busted Nut. This was one of a couple buildings that had pretty extensive masonry repairs, both tuck pointing and brick replacement of failed mortar joints and failed bricks, as well as they replaced the sealants on both sides of the building where they adjoin the adjacent property. Total project cost of $16,500, grant funds of $5,000. 119 2nd Street, El Mexican Restaurant. This is probably the most visual one, just because there's that change in paint color, right? And the awnings where there previously weren't any. So you see kind of those that were done. Also new doors, they had some cracked windows, those have all been replaced. So really quite the change at El Mexican. Great to see. About $8,600 was their total project cost for a grant amount of about $4,300. Squeaky Wheel Pottery, another big masonry project. Rebuilt just about the entire corner of that building when they're all said and done. This is also was one that had been previously tried to be repaired, but just frankly wasn't repaired the correct way. This grant dollars allowed for it to be repaired the right way, so it should last a very long time. Total project cost, $15,400, grant funds $5,000. And there you see, again, a pretty stark contrast in terms of all the repaired mortar joints and bricks themselves. 215 Sibley Street, Radke Accounting is located, also the previous historic city hall. This was historic reconditioning, the second floor windows, and then replacement of the storm windows. With this project also, they had been looking into doing this project for quite some time. We were looking into PACE financing through the St. Paul Port Authority. We were just trying to figure out how they could help make the dollars work because they were really old, drafty windows. This grant made that project possible. There you see both the exterior and interior images of the windows post-project. 218 Sibley Street, again, another window project in the downtown. This was those three second-story windows, again, historical restoration and reconditioning of those windows to make them, again, more functional as well as energy efficient. Project cost of just over 10 grand, so grant was 5 grand. 219 Sibley Street, where Adele Salon is located. Here's another extensive project in terms of masonry. Basically, the top 3 feet of that building was rebuilt. They had to take that all off, put in new. You can see on the after photos there, you can see how much of that building was actually taken apart and put back together essentially with the brick. So pretty extensive project there, 18,500, grant funds of 5 grand. About 150 bricks that were repaired, and this is one that once they actually got into the project, it was a little bit more than was expected. The private property owner was their responsibility since the grant was a maximum of that 5 grand. 311 2nd Street. This was actually a recent acquisition by Hastings Family Service. The old commercial facade had some cracked windows and an aged door, so they removed the single pane window that was cracked, put in a new front windows. Those windows are the ones that most closely match the windows on the rest of the Hastings Family Service buildings. Pretty extensive interior renovation, total project cost just shy of $21,000 for grant funds of $5,000. And on Vermilion Street, 2216 Vermilion Street, the former Trophies Plus. This is now River City Interiors. As you can see, probably the other more stark change visually, the removal of that large overhead door, replacement of the window, excuse me, not the window, but the doorway, and then the addition of that brick, that roughly 4 feet of brick or so on the bottom, and then fresh repair to the stucco. Project cost of just about $11,000, grant award of $5,000. Then HEDRA also approved a grant award to Clear Choice Pool and Spa at 1800 Vermilion Street. They had a couple extensions and unfortunately weren't able to complete the work within the allotted time, even with the extensions. You might have noticed they did paint the building recently. The grant award was for the removal of those cedar shakes in that front of the building that's a little bit, well, rotten. So they were unfortunately unable to complete that, but we hope that they look to do that project in the future. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Quick.
Commissioner Vaughn?
Thank you. Eric, as we continue this program, I see some of the projects probably didn't finish, or maybe the picture didn't show it, but let's say they need paint. Are they allowed to apply again? If they already got one of these grants, will we allow a business to, the same front, extend it?
Commissioner Vaughn, that's actually one topic of discussion for the draft revisions to the 2023 program that we'll get to. Staff has a recommendation for that. If we could, well, the recommendation is going to be basically make them wait until July 1 to let others have an opportunity if they received a grant in the prior grant year, but then they could after that.
Okay, thank you.
See what the thoughts are.
Anybody else before we move on to the 2023 facade? Okay, Eric, I think we can roll right into what we're looking at for next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam President. So for proposed changes in 2023, we're recommending that we adjust that we provide $1 of grant money for every $2 of private investment. That'd be changing from $1 of grant money for every $1 of private investment. One thing staff heard from HEDRA at a previous meeting was the desire for, is there a way to spread this money out even further? This is a way that we believe we can accomplish that by requiring a higher leverage. There should just be more projects available for funding. So that'd be one opportunity or one recommended revision. And then as was requested or asked about previously, what are people still eligible if they got one the year before? Our proposal is that yes, they would, but that they need to wait until July 1 to apply, to give others that hadn't received a grant in the prior grant year an opportunity to apply for. And then in terms of timing, with the 2022 program, we had it with a 3-month window, and we, frankly, staff, we didn't account for the winter season. So right away, we were right before HEDRA and asking for extensions on all these. So we're suggesting to change it from a 3-month timeframe to turn in receipts and get your money, to just start with a 6-month window, get into, frankly, that construction season, allow for a 2-month staff authorized extension if necessary, and then any additional extensions would require review and approval by HEDRA. That's what we're proposing. This evening, again, this would be a 2023 program, so we don't need to necessarily approve this tonight. If HEDRA is ready to, you certainly could, but really staff tonight is looking for any feedback or recommendations on the proposed changes to the program. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson.
I really like the changes you made. I think still giving someone like a dollar for every $2 they put in is a really good incentive to get a project done. It does spread it out further. My only question on it, just for discussion, is the July 1st deadline makes sense to me to give new people a chance at those available funds. But if we start July 1st, if they get approved, say, well, it'd be end of July, right? 3rd week of July, based on our schedule. So they would get approval for the project late July, and then they'd have to line up a contractor and try to get it done before, say, November, when this weather happens. Is that enough for them to get something lined up and completed? So either that needs to maybe move back a month or extend that into the next year to get the project completed? Just out of practicality. Other feedback on that?
Commissioner Vaughn.
Good catch. I don't really need to see it back. I mean, I think staff's doing it. I mean, the 2-month extent, I would still say HEDRA approves the program, proved it worked. It's another one to get going forward. I trust them. I think they're going to run a good program, and I don't think that they should have to wait on a policymaker to say, oh, you should let this one go. I think you guys do what it takes to make this program successful and keep it going. And give good feedback. I mean, if we start to say, hey, they're starting to back up, but there's a lot of people asking for it, or if someone wants to come in early because they're instead of waiting, maybe bring that scenario to us, but otherwise, I don't think it's going to get denied. If anything, I think we need to find a way to make that a bigger number of 50 than 50,000, and it someday may turn into a housing thing, same concept, that if you want to do something to your house, how do we continue to do that too? But that's long-term future stuff that I think it works, and it gives people a reason to go forward. So, thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Vaughn, Commissioner Johnson, on that timing piece, one thing we could look at doing from a staff standpoint with that 6-month waiting window is that we could still take an application in prior to that potentially, especially if we wanted to hit that July HEDRA meeting, that second Thursday. Kind of have it in the queue, let them know, hey, you're not eligible yet, but if you have things lined up and you're kind of got a contractor roughly penciling you in, then you can hit the ground running. That's something we could look at that I hadn't thought of before of. Put your application in, but we can't bring it forward until after July. We could do that.
Eric, I think this is a great program. I think it's been so successful. I think it's transforming some of the businesses downtown. Here's my question. If we're going 2 for 1, are we going to lose some of those smaller projects that we saw on that list where it's $10,000, so it's not a huge project, but, are they going to be able to do that kind of stuff, some of those small businesses, if it's 2 for 1? So now, instead of, they'll get whatever that, half, 2,500 or whatever it is, because they'll have to put that in. That's my only concern. And then the other, that's the visual pretty stuff, right? That's not costing the tuck pointing dollars. My other comment, and I think I've expressed this before, is I love it downtown, I love it on Vermilion, but I eventually would like to see it broadened into other parts of town so that I think there are some businesses in other parts of town that are starting to get a little worn too, that could use the benefit from that. But otherwise, I think it looks great. Yes, Commissioner Brox?
My only comment was gonna be, I know there was some logic as to why it was 40,000 budgeted for downtown and then 10,000 for Vermillion Street. I just wonder in the future, similar to Commissioner Horsch, if that money needs to be just available to everyone, any business in any location, or if they're on a main thoroughfare or some other kind of definition, because we do have spaces I can think of that could also use a little refreshing. So I realize that at the beginning here, we're trying to really help with some downtown improvements and kind of match some of the investment the city has made in improving the downtown by helping the local businesses do the same. Eventually, I'd like to see a bigger program that encompasses the whole city, and maybe we're not splitting the funds into areas, we're just making a pool of money available and making it available to those who apply and maybe who didn't get a grant before or something like that. That's just my suggestion. I don't have any authority to make that decision. It's just maybe a recommendation for the future.
Any other discussion? Eric, do you want to respond at all?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So with that, yeah, the original, the 2022, did allocate that 40,000 for downtown, 10,000 for Vermillion through the end of June, and then it was open pot for whatever was left. That was initially done, 'cause at first we were looking to commission a study, you might recall, just an architectural assessment of the buildings downtown that we knew we had brick issues, window issues, et cetera. And then we said, hey, let's pivot and actually just put the money to work right away. They know the issues, they just need help paying for it. With that said, that's been out there for a year. We've addressed at least a handful of those issues. I don't see a reason why, if it's HEDRA's desire, we couldn't pivot to at least 50-50, open pool of money for the two areas. If there is a desire from a geographic standpoint to not say, here's a pool for downtown and here's a pool for Vermillion, but rather, here's 50,000 for the area, first come, first serve. I think that's certainly something that, could be considered by HEDRA.
Commissioner Vaughn.
I think what Commissioner Brock's saying, at one time, we did that because we left a program that we were gonna do, and that's why we went to the 40-10. I think it should be open to every community member possible. And if it's successful, we need to find a way to make it even more successful. I just need to make sure it's a renovation, not, and maybe after so many years that they've done it, that I just don't want to see a business that made a mistake and say, well, let's change that and put this on there. I think it's got to be something that a business that needs some help to bring a building back. I don't know how you put that in language, but again, I leave that to staff to a degree, like fill out the application, but I know you want a little bit of guidance, like maybe it needs to be at least 15-year-old building or 20-year-old building. If there's a one-off, then you bring it back, but I think it should be the whole community. That simple. It's public dollars that should be used in the whole public, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally support that, and I get your concern. We don't want to be fixing new construction problems, and, that's not the purpose of this, and I would hope most business owners would recognize that, when they're looking at what the program is for. But within those parameters, I'm supportive of that.
I agree. I just think we, as we evolve and in this program, evolve in the future, just to think about reaching out. There's some businesses I can think of downtown that maybe didn't apply or didn't reach out. Have we reached out to any businesses to make them specifically aware of the grant, or is it more generally available?
Yes, Commissioner Brock's, we sent out a notice to all property owners within the areas that were eligible, and then a handful where we knew there were standing issues, mostly from the building department. We sent follow-ups of, hey, there's not just loan money, but grant money available, and some applied and some did not. So there's certainly more work to be done.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm supportive as well. I'm more just thinking futuristically about how we could include more businesses and more people to take advantage of it. And of course, with that is going to come a higher price tag. So I recognize that as well. But thank you for the refresher, because we talked about this a year ago and I can't remember what happened a year ago.
Lots going on, yeah. To Commissioner Vaughn's comment earlier, and making sure that, this is going towards not just fixing a new construction problem perhaps, or what this is, that really the issue is solving blight, that we were seeing blighted issues or building deterioration issues. the deterioration was more so downtown. We saw some blight on Vermillion Street, which is what made us hone in on that. When I look at the different commercial areas, the other probably next main one would be Highway 55. When I drive that, well, to and from home basically at this point, I don't see a lot of obvious blight, so to speak. There might be one or two here or there that could use a little bit of touch-up, but that blight that requires that public assistance through grant dollars, I think is what we're really trying to hone in, at least from a staff standpoint of, we want to check that box if we're going to bring an application forward. And I want to make sure that's HEDRA's desires as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Vaughn.
Thank you. I don't think we should vote today. I think we should wait till we have more colleagues here. I think it's good feedback to maybe put something in front of us at the next meeting to say this is what we suggest. I think it's got to be said in there, though, it's for facility, a building. Because I could see right away saying, my parking lot looks pretty tough. This sounds like a good thing to do, or I think it's got to be, it was a facade, and maybe we got to run with that saying, it's got to be your front-facing versus your back door needs to be replaced for security reasons. I just think we got to be, it's about blight, but also that can get pretty expanded in someone's mind pretty quick. So I would hope that next meeting we would see the program continue, that it's available for everybody at all times, and that it has to be facility-based facade. So I'll leave it up to staff to figure out how to write that. So.
Commissioner Johnson.
And if I recall correctly, you guys have a pretty detailed program on what is eligible for the facade improvement program. But maybe it was worth just a refresh on, I guess, making sure you didn't want to make any updates based on that feedback and send it out to us again to make sure we have the current rev. Because I know you did have it pretty spelled out. But yeah, it'd be good to review again, I think, and to Commissioner Vaughn's point, make sure we are comfortable with where those will go if we open it up more. But yeah, if it's impacting the business district, we want to make sure it's appealing for other businesses and for the business that's inhabiting it and visitors.
Yeah, I think this is one program where staff recognized a need. We had to recalibrate, we had to pivot. We did, it's been successful. So it's a good model. What we started with was great, it was successful. Now we're just hopefully expanding it, and maybe someday it's not going to be needed, but but for now, I just keep building on it. So great works for staff. Oh, sure.
To the point of should the amount be increased, I guess since we're going to be bringing it up again the next meeting, it's a chance for staff to look at it and just decide where the budget's at, if you propose adjusting that or not at this time. I think it's a good suggestion, though, if it's in the budget.
I can address that. We allocated $50,000 within our budget for '23 towards this program. So we've got that committed. I'm pretty sure that's going to move forward through council approval. There may be possibilities for us to allocate other resources. We can look into that to expand upon that program. But from a budgetary standpoint, we've got it set for '23.
Any other comments before we move on from that? Thanks, Eric. Okay, we're going to go into the electric vehicle charging stations and tourism.
Excellent. Thank you, President Horsch. So this is another kind of general discussion topic for HEDRA. This was a topic that was brought forward to staff by a HEDRA member. We did some initial investigation and kind of looking into this, and we want to bring it before the full HEDRA board to see what your thoughts, comments, wishes are on this for spending more staff time on it. Really the thought being that electric vehicles are coming. That's what the future will be at this point. And then how do we potentially leverage that from a tourism standpoint? The idea that, okay, right now, maybe it takes a little bit longer to charge those batteries than everybody would maybe like, but is that then an opportunity to have a captive audience for a handful of hours while that vehicle may be charging? Currently in Hastings, there's those 3 chargers you can see on the map here on the screen in front of you. We've got one down at the Confluence parking lot, one at the library, and then the one actually on the south side of town escapes me. It's probably near Colburnsville, based on where that's located. So in looking into this, a handful of cities, I know now the council has had a few conversations about this, but cities have been partnering with companies that will install all the charging stations needed, pay the city rent for typically the parking lots and the parks and things that they're located in. The company then, of course, makes the money off the people that charge their vehicles and that use charge. But an opportunity to kind of use this from both a tourism standpoint, also a financial standpoint from a city, not so much HEDRA, but a city standpoint of charging rent. So just generally curious HEDRA's thoughts on this. There are different parts of the city that's already looking into this that we're now aware of, but just curious HEDRA's thoughts and any desire for staff research into it.
Commissioner Vaughn?
Thank you. Do we have any data how much these three are being used today, or is our decision-making for the future that we think this is coming and there's opportunity for tourism? I'm a little hung up on it. I really think there's no free money. I get it. If it's so good, why wouldn't a business, private business, why wouldn't this company go to a private business saying, I'll put this in here in your place, and if I owned it, perfect, because I can get the tourism, they can stay with me, and if it's so good, why aren't they going to the private sector? I think they're coming on the public sector to try to find it's easier, probably, because I think cities are trying to say this is part of tourism. But we don't do gas stations. We don't do that for other types of vehicles that move things. So I'm a little hesitant on public sector getting into something without more data. It's too new for me to be jumping in for this option. And I think we did it. We already offer a public one in the ramp down here. And I'd like to see some data. Is it getting used? Is there a backup, or is there anything that says we need two down there? Is that a better option? I just think the private sector is going to come in sooner or later, and it might be a utility that might come into it. So that's my 2 cents on electric vehicles.
Yeah, I know Dakota has several, if I'm not mistaken, so that could be a good source to figure out, what their usage is too beyond our usage. So I think they've got them at the, if I'm not mistaken, county parks and different places like that. And I don't know, I would think we could find some data from them in addition to our data on, what their use is looking like. But I laugh because you said electric cars are coming, and I thought, well, Elon Musk would beg to differ. I think he's made himself really, really wealthy on electric vehicles. So I think it is. I think Mark brings up a good point. What is government's role in providing the just the space? I guess. I mean, we're not really doing much more than space, if I'm not mistaken. We're just saying, here's 3 spots in one of our lots that you can use, and it appears that we are getting some benefit to it because there's contracts. I mean, they're making money on this, or they wouldn't be giving us the contract. They are. So those are my thoughts. Commissioner Brox?
I think this is an interesting topic because after driving, I had an electric vehicle for 3 years, and I leased it, and I learned a lot about charging stations and how far cars would go, and I think it is beneficial to think futuristically because I think more and more people are acquiring electric vehicles, which means the demand is maybe not currently here, but it will go up. We know that we're moving that direction, so I think it makes sense to start planning for the future, even if it's not immediately right now. And my concern would be just in the locations that we choose to put the stations, because so my best example of this is that CHS Field in downtown St. Paul has really close parking, but none of their close parking has electric vehicle charging spots. You see some places where they put them like right front and center and they prioritize EV parking, but the problem is right now is there's sporadic adoption of electric vehicles. So you may have those 2 primo or 3 primo spots sitting empty at a game, and where they could be utilized otherwise. So what they've actually done in St. Paul is 2 blocks off CHS Field by the federal building, they had a series of charging stations. It's kind of sad because you have to be concerned about damage to the infrastructure that's put there, because we use those stations a couple times and they're targets for vandalism. Kids, I don't know, kids, youth, whatever, vagrants, I don't know, whatever they are, will come and beat up on them, rip the cord out of the thing or beat up on the thing. So you do have to, there is some public safety concern there too. So where you put them has to be visible, and I think it needs to be a good parking spot that somebody would want to use, but maybe not the front parking spot. So I think there's just a lot of considerations to take into account when you're thinking about placement. Because when we are placing them and telling a vendor where they can put them, that spot right now may not be used as frequently as it may be in 10 years. So I think it's just a consideration. And from what I've seen on some of the maps that we've looked at, that is being considered, that there's good parking spots, but they're not always the ones that are right in front of businesses or right downtown by the pavilion. You know, those spots are well utilized, and often when there's an event, they're full. So just making sure they're placed in places where they would be good parking, but maybe not front and center parking. That's the main thing, and they'll make money off of them because they charge by the kilowatt hour, and you have to pay, you know, for how much charge you're using, and there's apps that do that and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's really easy from a user standpoint. I think our standpoint is how many of them we want, where are they located. I wouldn't want them out in parks or somewhere that was remote, because I'd be concerned about vandalism and people not treating them well. And so, yeah, I think we just need to think about location and where we want them to be. If somebody's willing to put them in, I'm more than willing to let them. We just have to make sure the locations are great.
Commissioner Vaughn.
That's a good question, Commissioner Brox. If it's so good, I'd be curious if the government, why doesn't government just put them in? If it's a public parking lot and we can make money off a kilowatt hour, why don't we just make the investment and put it in and pay it off ourselves versus letting a private contractor take that? But maybe that's all in the details of contracts of what if somebody vandalizes it? What if I want to move it? I'm with you on the 10-year. We just had this discussion at work. 10, 20, these are long-term investments. And what happens when things change in 10 years and the numbers aren't paying for itself? Are they coming back and we're making decisions to move things around at whose expense? So I think we should look at that. How many cities have done this and have worked with their utility provider saying, can I just buy it from Dakota Electric and put it in Dakota Electric space? I'd be curious, and maybe they can't. Maybe that's the reason why they're not doing it. But I just know when I go to Alexandria and Target, they're full. I mean, there's piles of them.
Yeah.
But they did it as a reason to come to Target, go shop for 2 hours while you're plugged in here. I think that's a pretty smart business model. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think we can piggyback off that and, you know, put some stations in where we want to track businesses. And I'm curious to find out too if Dakota is put in their own, because I just can't remember a contract coming across my desk on those days, but it may be, but they may have put in their own. It's just a.
I think their charge point, the one at Spring Lake Park for sure, at the Dakota County Park, is a charge point station.
Okay.
So at least it's a privately owned entity. You know, I don't know if you can purchase them.
Okay.
As a matter of course, and own them yourself. But I kind of look at an electric charging station like solar equipment. You can put it on your house if you want. You can buy the solar panels and you can put them up there. And then every time technology changes, every time one breaks, that you got to service it. I kind of see that similarly with electric vehicle stations. Kind of what you're saying is, if we're not in charge of them and making money off them, we're also not responsible if one breaks and if it needs to be replaced, if technology changes and there's a newer version available. You know, there's different types of charging stations, whether it's a supercharger or regular charger. So there's all these considerations, and to me, it might be worth it when we're looking at it. You know, if we're not the owners, someone else is operating it, someone else is replacing it. They're kind of monitoring its usage. If it gets damaged, they're replacing it. So there's some advantages to having a private provider kind of watching over their technology and making sure that it's current and it's working. So there's pros and cons. I would tend to think that maybe having a private company managing it would be nice if we can tell them what to do with it. But owning our own would be an interesting thing to research.
Well, we gave you something to think about, right? You got some homework, unfortunately. Yeah, Commissioner Johnson.
I do like the foresight, because, not every time you go to town you need to get gas, but it'll be the same thing with electric cars. Not everybody's going to need them, so to the points that were made, I don't think we want to go too big and consume parking spaces that are in short supply, but as far as certain areas like downtown, there's not a lot of private parking. So where do you put one? I think there's areas of town where someone could dedicate some of their own property or put one in and be able to afford to do that and draw a crowd. But downtown, the business owners don't own the parking, and you don't want to make it harder to go there. So I think there's some merit to it, but I think there's also a lot of merit to starting small and seeing what the utilization is. Start with a handful of spots, and if those are full a lot, add some then. If they're not full a lot, then don't. And that'll probably occur with time. And good points about location. I mean, it makes you think maybe across from City Hall in front of the police station would be a nice, secure place for it, a block off of Main Street. But all really good considerations that were brought up. Are they interested in starting small, or is that like, no, if you don't want to offer 20 spots, we're not even interested?
Commissioner Johnson, so staff hasn't reached out to those companies. Again, with posting the agenda, when administration's working on this as well. So it's more so we get a temperature from HEDRA this evening. It sounds like there's interest. There's probably as many questions as there are interest. And so I think at this point we'll offer to administration that, hey, if you need some extra horsepower, we're willing to assist, but certainly not going to duplicate efforts and be inefficient that way. And so I think we've got what we need.
Great, thanks for bringing that forward to us tonight. I think we're on to reports and information. I think the first is open to business, the 2022 Q3 report.
Thank you, President Horsch. Yes, so Open to Business provided us with their Q3 2022 Open to Business report. Continues to be a well-utilized program within the community. However, we did learn at actually the BRNE visit last night that even with some of our efforts with marketing of that program, that there's still at least a handful of businesses that aren't aware of the services that can be provided through Open to Business free of charge to Hastings area businesses. And so that's going to be something, point of emphasis for staff to try and get that word out a little bit more, to try and make sure that people are really aware of all the great programs that are available. We continue to have really good participation from a county standpoint, the number of residents and businesses within the city of Hastings utilizing the Open to Business resources that are provided. HEDRA provides $5,000 to be part of that program annually. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
I don't think there's any questions, so we can move forward to the development updates. John?
Sure. Few updates of what's going on around the city with the Intex Plastic, the expansion project. Council did approve last Monday the sale of the land, the 3.1 acres that's adjacent to it for their use. Couple of provisions on there pertaining to having to provide the improvements within a given period of time and a reverter clause that was put upon that. But we are confident that that project will move forward. Plans are in for review. Construction of the project for the 62,000 square foot addition is scheduled for the spring. Also on the Monday meeting for council, they did approve a 2,300 square foot building for therapy ops, which will be located at South Frontage Road and Westview Drive by AutoZone. So they are looking to potentially start construction on that building yet this year. So we may be seeing activity on that through the winter. Their goal is to open that up by spring. They're a facility that provides occupational, speech, and physical therapy to individuals, primarily kids and families. So that'll be a nice addition to that area of town. We have a couple of construction projects which turned dirt here this fall. One being the stencil project on the UBC site downtown, Lake Isabel, and 89 units under construction right now. A lot of jackhammering that occurred early on. That's done with, pouring foundations. You can see the elevator shaft going up, which is great. And then a lot of grading activity going on at the project down by Coburn's for the 100-unit apartment building that is there. They're grading and probably foundation work starting shortly on that one as well. On that one, again, they're doing the first building along 33rd Street first, the second building coming at a later date there. With the confluence, the project continues to move forward there. A lot of HVAC work is what I noticed when I was out there recently. A lot more windows have been replaced. Most of those have been replaced at this time. Earlier tonight, they did have an event with the Rotary for the dedication of the flagpole up there, so that's up and running. A lot more site work's been done. That center courtyard area where in the hotel, they've put the fountain in, the landscaping in. The sidewalk's been opened up. I noticed that for the first time tonight on Second Street. That's been a couple of years, so that's nice to see that. You can walk through that again, which is great. So I think that's most of the activity that's going on right now. I can stand for any other questions.
Have we seen a decrease in building permits in the last couple months? You've seen nationwide trends. I was wondering if we're seeing any of that locally.
Yeah, a little bit of a dip. Primarily, our single-family permits are coming out of Heritage Ridge, which is that area Creative Homes has west of General Sieben. We've seen a little downturn on that one. When you take a look at future planning, they are grading for the 4th edition, the last edition as we speak right now. So they'll be bringing 30, 40 more lots into production in the spring. So that's good news. The conversations that we have on other properties that people wish to develop, single family, multiple family, those continue. So it's hard to say at this point. I mean, certainly the interest rates have diminished individuals' opportunity for purchase power, and that's had an effect on the building permit market. But there still is a real demand out there for housing at this point. So I don't know what that'll mean for the long term.
Commissioner Vaughn?
Thank you. Any update from our broker on our large industrial space out there? It was always nice when we had a broker down here because they would give us a list of who was calling and see what they're. I'm just curious if there's interest on this one out there, or is it
Hey, you
too
want
soon?
to take care of that, Eric?
You talked to Reese when I was.
Okay, yeah. Yes, we've had a couple of people that have been more than kicking the tires on this one. We may be speaking to someone in the next couple of weeks about a proposal for that, so that's good. We had an update from our broker earlier today on some other individuals that are looking to take portions of that site. We need to get some more information as far as what that might be and whether that's something to consider. But I've seen more activity from Rocos right now than I've seen in the past and other times when we've offered this for sale. So they seem to be making some good connections on this one. Individuals that are coming forward that have a good track record in industrial development. So it's looking better now than it has in quite some time.
Anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Okay, I'm using the gavel for the last time. Adjourned.